Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Fight Chat Friday from TKD Coach Academy. This week, we're going to look at restarts in ITF Taekwon-Do Sparring, how often they happen, what way the game state is when they do happen, what can you do and how can you think when those restarts are happening to influence the game state, and maybe we'll also look at how can you train to make better decisions around those restarts. So, if that sounds like something that you're not paying much attention to, maybe this is the episode for you.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Fight Chat Friday. So what we're going to look at in particular is the restarts, maybe in a sparring match when the referee stops it. Maybe there's an exit, there's a warning to be given, maybe there's a bit of a messy play, and the referee needs to stop the match, interject, do something, whether that's give a warning signal to the jury present, whatever, but there is a restart. And it's something that we almost take for granted a little bit because we've had a look at a couple of matches now, and we also did a bit of a poll, and it seems that people don't actually notice how important they consider this to be. So we did have a YouTube poll that we put out on this particular topic during the week, and we noticed that most people were thinking that, okay, possibly only 5 restarts every match, and some were thinking less than the actual number that we've come up with from the examples this week. So we've taken the videos from the minus 50 kilo final, the minus 57 kilo final in the men's. We've looked at the plus 85, and we've looked at the minus 62 in the senior female from this recent European Championships from 2021. So we're going to use those particular matches as the kind of samples. And what we found is it's actually in and around the 13 to 15 restarts in the matches. And it seems to be also where it makes sense. Most of the restarts come in the second round towards the later stages.
I'm just going to go and grab that graphic, Richie, and we'll have a quick look at that if we can find that nice and quick. Where, yeah, as you said, it was surprising to me actually the number of people that how would you say underestimated the number of restarts that actually happened in our game, and we'll just pop that in here. So I can shrink that a little bit. So we have 19% of people assuming there are less than 5 restarts, and for me that one was shocking. Because, you know, that just isn't the way that the game is at the moment, unfortunately. And I think that what that might relate to is people may be sparring national level tournaments where they do 1 2-minute round or 1 3-minute round.
Possibly, yeah.
Referees being a bit more forgiving at a lower level and not stopping on every infraction. Whereas I think this, the 5 to 10 where the majority of people fell, that's optimistic. You know, I mean, I think that would be a nice place for the game to be if we were somewhere between 5 and 10%. But, you know, as you said, in all of the ones that we've looked at, it's certainly sitting up there in the 10 to 15 mark. So yeah, it makes it a very kind of an interesting place to be. And what jumps out at me before we even jump in looking at these matches is if something happens that often in a match, you better have a plan for it and you better be training for it. You know, because if there's going to be a front leg side kick and you have to deal with it, we put in a lot of time and effort on the mats to deal with a front leg side kick, to have one that is threatening from ourselves, to deal with one that's threatening from our opponent. But if there are going to be 12, 14, 15 restarts, we better have a good plan for our restarts too.
Exactly. And that's the whole idea. Like, some people, they do have a little bit of a structure to what they want to do, and other people, they just kind of flow with it. So we will see some examples of this here in action and be able to give a little bit of commentary on maybe our thoughts and some ideas on the reasons behind why people take particular action.
Let's jump into that minus 50 match and have a look at the kind of restart. So the first one, start of every round, start of the first round, start of the second round, there's an opportunity to do something. We see Katie in the blue there taking a very deliberate step in and looking to take control of the center. So that's certainly a strategy we see from a lot of people.
Yeah, and you can see like the restart here that we're seeing now. Some of them have a little action of lifting the front leg and trying to close space. And some just have that little bit more patience. And of course, you need to be unpredictable. You can't do the same thing every time. But a big factor, I think, is how early in the match it is. First off, we're quite early in here. And also the position of the ring. They're right in the center here, so there's no immediate threat for you to like get out of a corner or something like that.
So yeah, and again, looking back at some of these ones, when we see a restart like the first one that comes up here, and it's towards the corner, it's still very early in the game. There's no major scores on the board, so there isn't a huge onus on anyone to do anything.
Mm.
But you still do expect people to pay attention to the part of the ring that they're standing in. And if someone is towards the edge, you'd expect them to be feeling a little bit more pressure. You'd expect the person pushing from the center to look to ramp up that pressure maybe, and try and win the percentage game by forcing an exit, forcing the person to start moving laterally and opening out, something along those lines.
Yeah, and obviously the score is a massive bearing on this as well. So now we see it's 1-1. So now it's a bit more cagey because this is a final. You don't want to kind of make any silly mistakes, but still you want to have a good solid start. So we can see that people are trying to squeeze space and try to get a little bit of pressure going. And Katie is actually doing a good job from my perspective on the restarts of trying to build a little bit of pressure. And it like she's generally like a counter fighter, so it's like you use that pressure to almost like relieve the pressure valve to then set up your counter. So it's a nice little strategy.
Definitely. And we can see very often Katie is happy to sit back a little bit and wait for her opponent to make that first move. And we'll see it off some of the restarts that this threat that's being presented to Katie more often than not isn't a side kick. And there's a little bit of a movement of the back leg from her opponent first on the way in. So she's happy to wait for that an awful lot of the time. And let her opponent commit that first step, and it lets Katie engage the hands. So we can see there's a bit of a strategy around Katie's restarts generally. And this one's a nice one because her opponent, Olivia, has changed it a little bit in deciding to go to hands herself first. So she broke her pattern, and Katie wasn't quite ready for it.
Yeah, and you best believe that like at the end of a match, whether you're winning or losing, there is going to be a lot of restarts, and there is going to be like some pressure in terms of time to get scores on the board. So this is a situation that like as we said, we take for granted, but you need
Yeah.
to actually prepare this because it will happen more than likely in every match, especially at the high level, because it is so close and it is like fine margins that are the result of the wins and the losses.
This one I just want to bring your attention to. So we have a stop, and if you watch Katie here, there's a foul, and she throws the eyes over towards us. That's where the scoreboard is here at camera side. So she's having a quick look to see what effect has that foul had on the scoreboard, and you can see from there she's still in the lead, and that kind of determines whether or not she'll chase. So you can be sure at this point in time, if she looks up at this scoreboard and it's showing, oh, there are now 3 flags to red, she's probably going to be looking to push, as opposed to setting herself for that defensive side kick and the retreat step.
Yeah, like another thing as well that we did notice in finding these clips is that some restarts actually happen quite quickly within each other, as in there's a bit of continuation. Sometimes you might have like 40 seconds, 50 seconds of no restart, and then all of a sudden there's like 3 or 4 on the trot. So it is something to kind of be aware of as well in terms of the intensity of it and the mental focus that you kind of need to be switched on very quickly and be ready for a couple of restarts within quick succession.
And like that in this next clip, one of the things that we want to point out here is it suits one person more than another. So if Olivia is carrying a little bit of momentum here, for example, it suits her to restart quickly and keep going. And it doesn't suit her to have Katie take any of the pace out of this here. So you can see Katie is looking at putting up a fence with the front leg and looking for those angled steps to try to take the pace out of the match. And even here with the few steps away, and you'll get the warning for it, but those few steps away by a couple of seconds, and we often see people use that. They'll come back in having slowed it down, and then they'll start fast to try and flip the momentum on their opponent. So there are little interactions like that can be taken on those restarts to try and gain micro advantages across the match.
But yeah, particularly so as the ones we just seen where there's a couple of restarts together at the end of the match, whereas if you retreat, there's a restart, you retreat, restart, retreat. Like that's kind of predictable. Whereas if, as you said, if you put in a little bit of a forward momentum or a blitz or something like that, it just kind of changes it a little bit and keeps the other person guessing a bit more. It can be a useful thing to do towards the end of the match, in particular if you're winning.
Very important thing to consider in that match as well. Like Rory DeVries, the referee, he didn't make any empty stoppages. So when he stopped it, there was a warning for red or blue or a foul.
Yeah.
There was nothing happened, carry on. Okay. And what that means for me is if there was 15 stoppages and the 2 restarts for round 1, round 2. If there's 15 stoppages, that's 15 changes to the scoreboard. So that means that while you're engaging in that match, there are 15 opportunities to go, from your restart and look at the scoreboard, and you'll be very tempted to do that. And it's a really, really special skill to be able to absorb the relevant information off that scoreboard while not losing focus on what your opponent is doing, or while still conceiving of your plan for what you're going to do next. So keeping in mind how information dense that scoreboard is, and being able to summarize that to what you need to know now. You either lean on your coach who tells you when it matters, which is for some people the best strategy, or you become very, very good at looking at where things have moved from the last time. It's kind of like comparing the like they had in the newspapers, the what's changed from picture A to picture B. You're almost trying to do that in a split second. So it is definitely a skill.
Yeah, it is, because as well, most people don't get to experience this until they go to the competition. So the
Huge.
experience factor of being here before is actually very, very relevant, because I won't say nobody, but it's very difficult to train in this particular situation to have the restarts, because we usually don't have referees when we're training. We don't have live scoreboards with referees. So this is actually a very important factor, but it's not something that we get to try and replicate often in our training.
Absolutely, and those are the things that you've mentioned. How often do we train with referees? And myself, as you'll see in the member section, we both did this week. We introduced the referees. We had the referees involved in the matches, but we certainly didn't have live scoreboards, so we had to improvise and create scenarios around that. And it's just a limitation. It's very hard to do that for most people most of the time. So let's have a look at the 57s. And again, these are all from the most recent European Championship. So the patterns and trends that we're seeing are very much current.
Yeah, and this one we see Kiki in blue takes a quick start and tries to get his opponent on the back foot. Obviously, he has a game plan. Himself and Vitali have met before, and they kind of know each other quite well. So, obviously your strategy and your game plan will come into it a lot, in particular of how you're gonna, if you want to squeeze space or if you want to almost pull your opponent in. It's very, very important. But again, we can see that not many restarts in round 1, and now this ramps up in round 2, because it gets down to the nitty gritty of the points, and there's a bit more on the line.
Yeah, there's a little bit more exchange of the lead in the match, and and that kind of or changes on the scoreboard, and partly it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more we get those changes on the scoreboard, the more we have those pressure, or the pressure is developing. There's going to be more restarts, more warnings, a couple of fouls, and that changes the scoreboard more, and it basically builds up the intensity naturally in most matches.
Yeah, what do you think of Vitali's strategy of lifting early on the restarts and almost trying to get over the top with that
Yeah, let's have a look
scenario?
Oops, I jumped too far there. Let's have a look at a couple of those. But and what he's seeing, again and again from Kiki is looking to put pressure on initially, but he's a little shorter and he's not able to go quite as high usually with that front leg. So I think Vitali is setting himself up very well to either clash and go or take the over the top. But he's happy to clash and neutralize the first one and not commit to to pressuring himself in that early restart.
Yeah, because a huge advantage for Vitali is the distance he has because of his height at 57. So he actually does it really well to maintain that space on every restart, and he's actually kind of keeping the distance as one of his main controls. And we spoke about this before of the 3 main controls you have, so check out some of our other videos on that. But distance is a major one of those, and if he can control the distance throughout all those 15 restarts or however many we had, it puts him in a good position most of the time.
Yeah. So I just want to bring back to this one, number 10 here, where we can see a situation where we as coaches kind of get a little bit, it's like, okay, well, this is where the match stops, so fair enough, the referee restarts you here. But then we look at the decisions that are taken by both parties, and I think this is the one that ends up with Kiki getting the axe kick. But the pressure forward is, for me, you're looking at it coming from that wrong angle. So he's pushing and giving Vitali room to escape out to the side there with no problem. And we can see sometimes with the enthusiasm to just go again and again. Actually, there on that restart, he's pushing without closing off Vitali first. So we can see that some of the decision making under pressure isn't perfect. And that's
Yeah.
exactly why we want to be able to practice this. The position in the ring should matter. The state of the scoreboard should matter. And that's why the restarts are such a critical thing for us to start looking into at this stage.
Nice juicy exchange there on the hands from the
Yeah,
lads
I
at the
gotta
end.
love that. Gotta love that.
Yeah, that's nice. But I think, as you said, the important point here is like having a threat behind your intention. And I think we did a video recently on how to have a more threatening sidekick.
Mm.
So I think that links in very well here with the restarts. If you can use these different ways that we said to have a more threat towards your front leg on your opponent, then that will actually help your restarts a lot, because sometimes you just lift the leg and there's no real threat behind it. And then, like we've seen, it gives the opponent the advantage to move or set up a nice counter of their own. So you need to have a real threat behind it if you're looking to squeeze that space off the restart with the front leg.
Yeah, but I mean, that's the thing. I mean, we could see where Vitaly was able to hold his ground and lift his leg, from that shorter stance, knowing that Kiki was going to have to come at him. Kiki was chasing the match, and Kiki had
Yeah.
set a pattern, so he was going to be coming in. So it let Vitaly stand tall, bring the front leg high, and be on top. As we've often discussed
Simple
before.
principles we always say about.
Simple
Yeah.
principles, but they're important. Where on the reverse of it, there are restarts where in those situations, Kiki's pushing Vitaly, but not towards an edge, not towards a corner. He's not. It's gotten to the point where we're rushing to get the score, but we're not crafting the score. And sometimes, this is the thing in your restarts that the what's important now or what is next is sometimes not go for the score. It's not go on the straight line. Sometimes you have to cut off the angle first and go. Sometimes you have to just, stand your ground. So, if on the other hand, Vitaly finds himself in the middle with Kiki pushing from the edge, well, he might be more than happy then to just kind of put out a fence front leg side kick to the hip and just clash the legs, knowing here's the ring to retreat into. So we're just looking to see, are we seeing these changes in like almost ideology or tactics, depending on the game state, the position in the ring, the whole thing. And that's what we want to see. We want to see people making conscious choices to behave differently because of that. And I think that's the whole thing. The restart is almost like that. It's a moment to take, take a pause
Literally.
and go, okay, I have a second here to come up with a better plan. And each time you do that, if you have 15 occasions to do that, and 15 times out of 15 you outthink your opponent, or you make the correct tactical decision, it's the incremental gains then that go on towards helping you win a match, particularly when it's close.
Yeah. I think that, especially when we see how many of them are happening, I think that especially in that second round, if you're making those better decisions, in those split second restarts, then you're putting yourself in a great position for sure. But so far we've seen two of the kind of lighter weights in male and female. So now we'll have a look at the kind of bigger boys and see, is there any kind of difference? Is there less restarts? Is there a different strategy? So that was kind of the idea here on looking at two different type of weight sections, and we can see same kind of a start, trying to squeeze space nice and early. Obviously, these boys take up much more space. So when you compare it to the -50 ladies, there's much less ring space available.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can see that they're squeezing with different strategies as well. They're using that like incremental like squeeze, just those smaller body movements to bring things in a little bit closer and go. And I think there you have something in the restart where, and it's a common thing, Gujawa doesn't agree with with Rachel's decision there to give him a foul, and he's like, okay, his focus is now gone off of his opponent. And I think if that happens a little later in the match, there's a really good chance there for Bartek to put a lot of pressure on, because his opponent is taken off. If there's a blitz that comes directly out of that, I think that matters in a big way.
Yeah, and this is a nice restart that we don't really see somebody closing the space and going to hands too often. So
Yeah.
it's a nice one because it does potentially catch your opponent off guard. And obviously, both of these two guys actually know each other quite well. So it even becomes more of an important thing to be unpredictable. But I think the squeezing that Bartos does is very good. You can see his front leg there on every restart. He's just creeping his front leg in and in and in. And it just like, without you noticing, he's actually closing the distance really well. So you see he does it on every restart. His front foot comes in, comes in, comes in. And one of his biggest weapons, of course, is him launching forward with those hands.
Yeah.
So he puts himself in a great position to use his biggest strength with
And
every restart.
Yeah, and then we see the one variation at the end when the score
Yeah,
probably
yeah,
doesn't matter. But I think absolutely the principle that you take from that is, and we'll wait before we look at the 62s. The principle that you're looking at that from Bartek is he realizes that his game against Gajawa is about shutting off the legs, not
yeah.
giving Jacob the advantage of that longer reach. And every restart is an opportunity to make his little step closer before the leg comes up. And then it's a
Mm.
case of which is going to be faster, you getting your leg up or me getting my hands through. And we'd love to see, as a reaction to that, Jacob going to hands first. You know,
To switch
Bartek
things up.
steps forward, bam, and the hands come in from Jacob, but it didn't happen, which is the kind of thing that you kind of say, okay, if you're going to try and do that, right, let's see if you're really willing to kind of commit to it and see what's
Mm.
there.
Yeah. Interesting that, like, obviously the guys take up more space, like we said, so they can kind
Yeah,
of afford to use that a bit more in terms of just that stepping in. So maybe not something that you could employ in the lighter weight divisions because of the distance that's there between you and with the ring space, but it's still something to be aware of.
sure. Just to finish off on this, let's have a quick look at some of the 62 female. So just going up the weights a little bit on the female side as well and see if there's any standout differences.
Yeah,
Um,
so this one would be kind of roughly in the middle tier of the senior female. So just again, just a bit of contrast to see is there any difference. But what we can see is there's a lot of just almost like empty bouncing in this one. So both competitors are almost waiting a bit more. And again, this is quite early in the first round, but
yeah.
generally there's a lot of just bouncing as the first thing to do, and then you see kind of what happens from there. So it's interesting just to see a little bit of contrast compared to some of the other ones we've seen so far.
Yeah, and I think what you've got in this is it plays in a similar way to the plus 85 final where Mira is looking to be just inside the range where it's risky for Anna Linnea to pick up that front leg, and just wants to make her take a chance on it, and give Mira the chance to go directly to hands if possible, get into her comfortable leg range. Whereas Anna Linnea has been happy right through all of the earlier rounds as well, in general, to I suppose uh, retreat a little bit, make space for her legs even off the restarts, and take a pot shot at those headshots. I think.
Yeah.
But what's unusual is to see the pattern maintained for 2 rounds.
Yeah, and actually then that pattern being broken on the very last restart, which actually wins her the match, which is funny enough because you see that most of the restarts she's just holding space and lifting her leg.
Yes.
And then on the last one, she actually recognizes, okay, it's 2-2, and she takes a gamble, pushes forward off the front leg, and actually goes to hands, which you don't see too often
No.
in this match, and you don't see it too often off the restarts. And that actually gets her the win in the end. So, as we said, the unpredictability, this is it.
Yeah.
So she closed the distance and boom. So that wasn't something that she's done ever before off a restart. So
Yeah.
there
In
you
that
go.
match for sure. And I mean, this is what we're trying to get at, I suppose, with today's episode and with the quick view into some of those matches is just how impactful those restarts can be. Remember, they come following a change in the game state, and they give
Yeah.
you an immediate opportunity to take some positive action. So we look at them, I think in ITF is a little bit, they are a curse. Like, we don't like them because we don't like our
Breaks the
match being
flow. Yeah.
interrupted. It breaks the flow of the match. But if we're going to have to deal with them for the moment, while there are so many warnings available, while referees stopping, to break contact or to stop the flow of the match, while that's something, we've got to then use those restarts as a tool, as something
Mm.
that it can be a break in concentration, it can be something that changes your focus, or it can be an opportunity for you to leverage momentum over your opponent, to set or break a rhythm, to very, very quickly influence the game state. So start looking at them positively and thinking about how to train for them, I think, is the message out of this one.
Yeah, and I think that today's episode kind of links in as well with spacing in terms of the corners. So maybe we
Yeah,
will look at that next week and how people squeeze the space similar to Bartos today, and
yeah,
how people actually get out of that corner effectively and potentially get out of there with a reversal where they're in the center. So maybe we look at that next week. And for anybody who is part of our members group, make sure you check out this week's video because we will be going in detail of how we do kind of like set up scenarios and to facilitate this type of training, because we've now highlighted how important it is and how much we underestimate it is very obvious. So now we will show you guys how to actually implement this into your training and potentially get a little bit of advantage for competitions in particular, rather than training or your general training or sparring, because this is very competition focused. So it will give you an advantage if it is something you're aware of.
Excellent. So, folks, if you're interested in that, make sure you check out our member section. You will definitely see the link next to this YouTube video. But if you have any comments, any questions you want to ask, by all means, throw them into the comments below, and we will definitely get back to people on that. So, until next Friday, we'll see you soon.
See you in the next one.
Eek.